Okay, welcome back. We're doing chapters 5 through 8 in the command line book. Before we get much further into the command line book, if you're not really comfortable with relative paths, the chapter 2 part where, I'm down in the tree and I want to go up or I want to go down, if that's fuzzy, then you need to spend some more time on it, because practically everything we do from this point on is going to require you to really understand relative paths. Okay, just say. So chapter 5 is talked about working with commands. And the first thing they talk about is there's basically 4 different types of commands. So if I had like the copy command, that's an honest-to-God real thing. I mean, it's a real honest-to-God command that lives. I can search the system and probably find somewhere like in user bin, there's going to be a file called CP. It's going to be that command, the equivalent of like an exe file in the Windows world. So that's normal. And then it could be something like the change directory. When I do a CD, there is no command called CD. If you were to search the entire system hunting for something called CD, you were not going to find it, because it is not a command. It's part of the shell. The shell has all sorts of commands that don't live as individual EXEs out there in the world. Okay? And then the third option is a thing called an alias. And an alias just allows you to, it's kind of sort of like a shortcut. It allows you to take things and like add. So whenever I type ls, I really want ls minus capital C, as an example. So there's a cool way you can do that. And then the last thing is it could be what's called a shell script, which is like a small application that's written. Yeah. So it could be like it's, written in the language of the shell. And so those are the 4 options. And so you might be thinking, well, how in the world am I going to be able to tell them all apart? Well, believe it or not, there's a type command. So I'm going to say type, then I'm going to say CP. And it's going to say, okay, so CP really is an honest-to-God real command, and it lives at bin CP. Cool. All right, so let's try that with type CD, right, for change directory. It's going to come back and say, this is a built-in shell command. Cool. Let's do type ls. Well, ls is an alias. Yeah, all this time we've been actually running an alias. And the thing is, when we type ls, it automatically chooses the color option. Remember how, the directories are dark blue and, those kinds of things, right? Okay, so those things are automatically turned on. So it's like, it's sort of like my default options. Whenever I type the ls command, I want to also always use the color option. So this thing is an alias. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I'm not going to show you an example of a shell script just yet, because we're going to be writing our own, but that's okay. So there's another command other than type that shows you where something exists. Okay, so for example, there could be multiple versions of copy. There could be one in bin and could be one in user bin, and how the heck would you know? And so there's a thing called which. So if I did which CP, it's just going to tell me where it got that. Okay? So if there are multiple ones, okay, if there are multiple ones, well then it's going to tell me which one it's using. Okay, that kind of sort of makes sense. Now, if I was to say which on the CD command, what do you think it would do? Because the which command is supposed to tell me physically where it exists, right? Well, where does the CD command exist? Well, it exists in the shell. Therefore, there is no path that goes to something called CD. So it fails. Cool? Make sense? Okay. So we kind of sort of talked about documentation. We talked about the manual command once, okay? Just as a refresher, if I said CP for copy, it's going to work, right? I'm going to hit Q to quit. But now I'm going to say man CD. What? There's no manual for the CD command? That didn't make any... Wait a minute. CD is a shell command. And so for reasons that only they know, there's a different command for getting help for the built-in ones. So it's the man command for the honest-to-God real external, whatever you want to call them, honest-to-God real executable programs. And the other one is help. So help CD is the one that gives you information about... So that's one of the reasons why you need to know if it's a built-in command of the shell or is it an external command, because if you want to get the documentation, you have to use two different techniques. Okay? Cool. So, the help notation. Let's just look at this thing. You see how they have like the capital L and capital P and capital E and all these kind of things. These things show up. The square brackets in the manuals, both the help and the manual, mean an optional thing that could show up. Those things that are mandatory are shown, just with letters. But if it's optional, it shows with square brackets around it. So that's just one of the things you need to kind of learn about how to read the documentation. Okay. So an awful lot of commands actually have kind of sort of a shortened version of the manual. For example, I'm going to go back to manual again. I'm going to say man CP. And I'm on page 1. And I'm going to go, that's page 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it's 5 pages long. That's an awful lot of stuff. But what if I said CP --help? So this gives you kind of sort of the same information, but perhaps, not always, but perhaps a little squashed down and a little bit less. And it's a little more narrative. Rather than just being in the manual speak, they're actually giving you real sentences like, a special case. Okay, kind of makes sense. Now, here's a weird one. I'm going to say man space password. Okay, that's the command that you use to change your password. Okay, so here we go. Now, if you see at the very, very top, it says password, and in parentheses it has a 1. Okay, and then it says user commands. User commands. And the reason is the manual is broken up into several little sections, and each section has a number. And so user commands are section 1. Okay, and so in the book they show an example. The man page numeric categories. How's that for crazy? So section 1 is for user commands. Section 2 is for programming interfaces for the kernel. Like you're going to be spending a lot of time there, right? Programming interfaces for the C library. The special files, number 4. And then file formats, like how is this thing formatted? And then games and screensavers and miscellaneous and system administration things. So I happen to know that password is also a file. It's in etc. password. Okay, so that password is both a command and a file. So what do you think I have to type to get the file format on that guy? Okay, so in order to get this thing to provide me the one that I want, so password is one of them that I want. So I'm going to say man space 5 password. And this will get me a different version of, it's still the manual page, but you can see it up at the top. It says password with parentheses 5, and it says file formats. Because when we go look at the password file, which we're going to be doing a lot, it talks about here are the fields and here are how they're separated. It's documentation about the file format of that particular file. Kind of cool. Alrighty. So the section numbers, do you have to kind of remember them all? Like, oh my God, what section number is it? Well, to tell you the truth, you could just go all the way down to the bottom And it's going to give you some suggestions. Like down here, it's going to say, there's password 1. Okay, and you go, so hey, let's try that again. All right, I'm going to go do just a plain old password. And then I'm going to go down, and you go, well, that's not the one I wanted, but I don't remember what the number is. So if you go all the way down to the bottom, most likely it's going to say, here's another one called password 5. That way you don't actually have to memorize those stupid numbers. Okay? Cool beans. So let's do one more. I want to do man space something called mtools. Okay? Just don't worry about what that means. And it says, well, I don't have an entry for that. And the idea is that the manual page, every time you go get a command, remember when we got the tree command, right? So if I say man tree, it gives you the, so when you go in and you install a command like tree, along with it comes the man page. Okay, so the documentation is kind of sort of fluid. So it only provides you documentation for the stuff you actually have, which is actually pretty good. So if you type in something that doesn't exist, if I go here and say kumquat, it comes up and says, man, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. But if you talk about something that does exist but has not been installed, okay, like mtools, it could say, hey, now see the difference? Kumquat said, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. Go away. But when we typed mtools, it said, hang on a second. I know that something called mtools exists, but you don't have it installed. Would you like to install it now? And no, we're not, but that's cool. Okay, so what if you don't even know the name of the command? All you know is you want to do something to do with copy, but you can't remember that it's the CP command. Okay? You mean you know it has something to do with copy. What I really need, for example, is sort of like a search engine that looks through all the manual pages and finds anything that has reference to copy. Wouldn't that be kind of cool? There is one. However, it's bizarre. It's called apropos. I know. You probably have to stop and spell this really slow and easy. Apropos. It's French. Of course, I don't know why they didn't just call it search, but what the heck, right? So now I'm going to go in here and say copy. And this is going to give you a listing of all of the man pages that have something to do with copying. Isn't that pretty cool? All right. So this is a search engine on the manual pages. Cool. Okay. Remember I talked about how you can have the help command, and sometimes the help command is sometimes better, but maybe not, right? So if I said copy dash help, that might actually be a little better. Well, most commands also have a thing called what is. Okay, and what is definitely shorter. So if I say what is, one word, what is CP, it's going to give you just this tiny little piece of describing what that thing is. And it's copying files and directories. So if you kind of sort of thought you knew what the answer was on how to copy, instead of using apropos and getting a huge listing, you think, I really think it's the CP command. And so you would go, what is CP? And it'll tell you and go, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. Cool. Okay, there's yet another, because man pages are kind of sort of clumsy. They were written way back when. So there's a new version of the man pages that have lots of stuff like hyperlinks and things you can go to other places. And that's called info. But we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so I'm just going to pause this and we'll show you that in just a few.